Hi, I'm Evan Dixon, Vice President of Communications for Crest Forum. Thank you to the previous panelists for sharing their insights on how a pathway to net zero impacts U.S. energy security. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the first armchair discussion of this year's National Clean Energy Week, which features Maria Robinson, the Director of the Grid Deployment Office at the United States Department of Energy. As the United States expands the production of clean energy, grid modernization and resilience is more important than ever. I look forward to hearing how the agency is working to ensure the delivery of reliable, clean energy throughout the United States.
I'm Maria Duane Robinson. I am the Director of the United States Department of Energy Grid Deployment Office.
And hi, I'm Emily Duncan. I'm the Senior Vice President of Federal Affairs at American Electric Power, an investor-owned utility that has operations in 11 states.
All right, Emily.
All right, well, let's kick it off. Why don't you talk a little bit about Grid Deployment Office and kind of, what's within your purview, what do you oversee, and the programs that you're putting out at a high level?
Sure. So we're one of the brand new offices that was created post bipartisan infrastructure law, and of course is tasked with implementing parts of that and the Inflation Reduction Act. So within our purview, we have sort of three areas of focus. One of which is on maintaining existing generation assets, be it nuclear or hydroelectric power, both of which are incredibly important. We have an enormous transmission division that is focused on financing, permitting, and planning. And then we have a grid modernization division that is looking at both how to help states plan for the future, as well as providing a significant amount of funding to states, to utilities, to munis and co-ops, lots of different entities that are looking to upgrade their existing electric system. So we span quite a range, and we're just excited to hit the ground running.
No, I really appreciate that, and it's remarkable. Brand new office, you're trying to hire folks, bring people in, both from within DOE but outside of DOE, and standing all this up while also issuing grant opportunities and FOAs and notices of proposed rulemaking and comment opportunities for folks. So it's really impressive everything you've been able to kind of get out the door, and doing all that while doing stakeholder engagement is pretty remarkable. I'm curious if you could talk about, I think one of the things I really like and admire about GDO, and I think is really important, is kind of the fact that you have your eye both on the generation and the transmission, right? I mean, and what we're seeing across the country, and certainly the markets in which AEP operates in, is some real capacity constraints, right? And those capacity constraints can be generation, they can also be transmission, right? And the build out and need of all of those assets as part of the clean energy transition are so important. And so I wonder if you could touch a little bit on that and kind of how you view both the generation and the transmission side and kind of how that comes together a bit in GDO.
Absolutely. And I think that some of the planning work that we're trying to do, especially when we're looking at, we have two different major transmission plans coming out later this year, the finalized version of our needs study, which looks at basically where there are capacity constraints and concerns across the entire country. It's not saying this is exactly how to solve it, but saying this is where there are problems. It should surprise no one that there are problems through a big part of the country, as you might have seen in the draft version of that. And then later, a national transmission planning study, which actually gets down to that nodal level and helps try and figure out where investments should be made. And that all comes into play with the resource adequacy concerns that we do hear about every single day from our RTOs and grid operators across the country. Certainly trying to balance the shift right now where we're in that middle space, and no one loves a liminal space. And we're all trying to figure out how we get from point A to point B. And so this is something where I think we really have a great view on it, of trying to help the industry do that transition in a way that focuses on reliability, recognizing that no matter what, the lights need to stay on, and then also focusing on resilience on the off chance that the lights do go off for weather related reasons, that we figure out how to get them back on really quickly. And so those two pillars underlie everything that we're doing here.
Well, we certainly think that's important, right? As the name on many people's bills, then we want to keep the power on, we want to keep the lights on, and so appreciate that focus around reliability and resilience. And if we get kind of into the details of the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership, also known as GRIP, we're going to throw around a lot of acronyms here, so I'm going to try to keep them defined as we move through it. But there are kind of multiple areas within kind of the GRIP program, and some focus on grid modernization and for transmission and distribution. Some focus on technology solutions, and some go directly to utilities. Others, you go to states and communities, and kind of creating partnerships via that avenue, I think, is important too, and we can get into that. But kind of curious, when you think about reliability, resilience, and kind of the modernization of the grid, right? Again, we need both of those, right? We need to maintain and upgrade the grid that we have, but we also need to think about how do we transform that grid for some of these new solutions that are becoming on board from a generation perspective. So can you talk a little bit more maybe about the GRIP program, how you envision that, what that looks like, and kind of how you see that moving forward?
Sure. So thank you to everyone who applied to the first round of GRIP, and hopefully we'll have some news for you in the relatively near future. I know everybody is waiting and sitting at the edge of their seats for results there. And we've really also started thinking about what we want to do in the next round of funding also. So this is one of those areas where what I think will help bipartisan infrastructure law catapult over some of the gains that we made during the ARA days is that we get to do multiple rounds of funding.
Yep.
So we learn a lot each time that we go through. And I think hitting on the point that you are emphasizing, which is how do we also take our existing grid and really upgrade that in order to make the most gains that we possibly can without, say, having to go through full NEPA. It's something that a lot of people are interested in. It comes up occasionally in my life, which is not to say that we're against doing NEPA by any stretch of the imagination. It's just something that I've heard occasionally that folks are trying to, maximize existing efficiencies, certainly. So I think a big focus on where we can encourage more use of advanced reconductoring technologies, using some GETS technologies, DERMS, taking our both distribution and transmission grid to the next level to enhance that capacity, I think is something that we're particularly interested in, and we'll be messaging that a little bit more clearly once we have that next FOA out on the streets. So it's in addition to that, I'd say that we are constantly and excited about seeing applications that are pushing the envelope but are really replicable, something that will help everybody across the country and get utility commissioners more comfortable with a certain technology or with even a certain type of rate making basis or planning process. So that's something that we are taking all the knowledge of bringing together folks inside industry as well as inside DOE, using all that knowledge to create something that's actually beneficial to the overall or private sector.
I think that's great. One of the things we're really hearing, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, right, is we talked about reliability and resilience, and that's really important. But the other thing that's really important for utilities and our customers is affordability, right? So AEP operates in a lot of rural areas, but utilities across the country have customers who are facing affordability constraints where their energy bill, is really pushing up against what they have in their wallet. And so I think our regulators are really pleased to see these programs that are coming out of DOE and see them as real opportunities to kind of help leverage taxpayer dollars to help customers and find a path forward on the clean energy transition. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how your office views affordability, how you kind of, are approaching that and what that looks like as you see it via these programs?
Certainly, we've heard from a lot of utility commissions that want to make sure that their regulated entities are maximizing this opportunity. And we see it from states as well of go out and get that federal money. So what it results in is some extremely competitive programs. So it is forcing folks outside of their comfort zone, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing either. And I think for a lot of, especially these amazing state energy offices or utility commissions that are somewhat under-resourced and have been looking to do specific projects but haven't been able to find the capital to do it, giving them that opportunity through this work. Now, at the same time, a lot of this requires a cost match, which can be really difficult. And so making sure that we are giving a good basis for regulated entities to be able to go back to your regulators and say, this was a really good investment. We got it at half price, uh, thanks to the federal government. And that may have some sort of rate impact in the short term, but look at all the ways in which it will benefit in the long term. And we recognize that that is part of, you know, the conversation that we need to have with applicants and awardees moving forward, and making sure people recognize that we're not that no one here is trying to gold plate the grid. The grid needs every last cent that we can invest, and we're investing smartly, most importantly, and trying to do this in a really thoughtful way, and looking at it at a big picture level of what we can do, not just in the here and now, but making sure that it lasts for the next 100 years.
Yeah, I think that's so well said, and appreciate you continuing to kind of push that point forward. I know that's a point we're making in our states and with our stakeholders. And so you've talked about, talking to regulators, talking to state energy offices, which is fantastic. And I think the stakeholder engagement at DOE has really been phenomenal. Kind of curious, what are some of the other stakeholders that may be coming through that maybe you didn't expect? I can say from our perspective, we've really used these programs, right? Not only to, on the one hand, it's a great opportunity for our customers to help possibly lower some bills and get some cost sharing for programs that we think are really essential to bring our grid into the 21st century, but also see it as a great opportunity to leverage those stakeholder relationships, right, at the state and local and community level, and see it as a real platform to deepen or create new relationships where maybe we haven't necessarily engaged in the past with certain stakeholders. I mean, we're engaging with food banks on some of these programs, right? Who would have thought? So I'm kind of curious from a stakeholder engagement perspective, kind of who's been seeking you all out and interested in some of these programs that maybe you didn't expect.
I was personally surprised at the number of universities that came through looking to do some upgrades. And this is an area where I think there's a lot of universities that have committed to net zero, that are really starting, their campus facility folks are really starting to look at what they can do on their own without having to rely on their utility or their muni or co-op, and trying to work through that on their own. And so a lot of folks have come in the door with some interesting proposals from that end. And I'd say there's a good number of folks in the defense community as well who have been interested in a lot of our programs because they don't see as clear of a pathway for grid upgrades on their own, especially on their bases. And so this is something that we're trying to connect a little bit better with our friends over at DoD, saying, okay, so what of your programs actually would fall under this, but are clearly not being marketed in that way to some of the bases and ports that we're having conversations with. So it's been a great opportunity to bring together some of those different communities and work through. A lot of this to me is an interesting puzzle solving mechanism where I like to talk to the entity and say, what is it you're trying to do? And then try and come up with a list of the different programs across the federal government and say, here's where you should be talking to the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, and here's where you should be talking to EPA, and here's where you should be talking to USDA, and try and help them navigate through, because there's so much money, but that means there's so many programs with very specific requirements that it's a lot. It's a lot for folks who have resources, and it's a lot for like tribes that don't at all. So really trying to make it an easy front door is my goal.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fantastic. And I think probably, and perhaps unfairly from an external view, sometimes we wonder if different agencies are talking to each other within the federal government. So it's great to hear that there is collaboration going on between agencies. And I'm also curious, not only between agencies, but perhaps even within DOE, how, there have been so many programs that have received funding or have been stood up: Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, Loan Program Office, and then, programs that have been at DOE for a long time that are also receiving funding and are kind of part of this, this cause, if you will, this effort, right? Whether it's the hydrogen office, whether it's the Office of Electricity. So just kind of curious how that engagement is going between the various departments as well, and what that looks like.
So the way that we've set it up, DOE did an internal reworking of its undersecretariats to accommodate all these new offices. So all of the deployment-oriented offices, the loan programs office, the manufacturing and supply chain office, ours, state and community energy programs, we all live under one undersecretariat, David Crane. And so we all talk regularly, have a lot of meetings. And then our friends in the more applied sciences, Office of Electricity, EERE, all of those folks, I spend a ton of time having conversations with them, in part because they're doing a lot of grid mod related work also, and trying to just coordinate across ourselves is really important to us. But what I would encourage folks to do is, if you're seeing this and you're not familiar with all the different programs out there, feel free to reach out. I think this is one of the most accessible federal government agencies at this point in time. Not to throw any shade on any of our other friends, but we're really trying to make sure folks are maximizing these opportunities, recognizing the window is short. I'm sure it doesn't feel that way unless you have a deadline coming up.
Say, it does
And there are
sometimes.
many deadlines happening around here all of the time.
Yeah.
But there's so much happening, whether you're looking for actual deployment of resources, whether you're looking for, a market study or something along the rebates, any of those things, that's something where hopefully we can point you in the right direction and get you the information that you need.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's certainly been our experience. The engagement and the outreach has been really phenomenal. Going back, I know we've talked a lot about kind of the grid and the GRIP program and what that looks like. On the generation side, you mentioned hydroelectric, the hydroelectric program. I know we're really interested in that, and several other entities are as well. You mentioned nuclear. Kind of curious how you view that generation side and that portfolio, and what that part of the program looks like a little bit more.
So it's phenomenal. It doesn't make headlines all the time because it is less than $1 billion total, but it is the largest investment in hydroelectric systems ever, at like $760 million. And that's a huge change for that industry, where we're seeing ridiculously long lead times for relicensing happening, and trying to work through some of those issues, help to cover some of those costs of the need to do some environmental management, or doing some grid efficiency work to make sure that you're getting the most out of your existing dams. And so this is an area where we've put a ton of thought into making sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck, knowing this might be a once in a lifetime opportunity here for the hydro industry, and working really closely with our poor friends at FERC, who are doing all these relicensing and realizing there's a lot of work to be done ahead of them, and making sure that everyone's on the same page there. This is something where, if these resources were to disappear, we would have a very serious problem on our hands, both in terms of resource adequacy, but also the balancing that is provided by hydro. And this is something that cannot be emphasized enough. And I'm really impressed with a lot of the work that our team, especially out of the Undersecretary's office, is doing, working really closely with tribes who are frustrated about longstanding issues that they've had, and really trying to make sure that they're heard and we're still meeting these clean energy goals that we have. It's a lot of work to do that type of stakeholder engagement, but it's certainly going to pay off in the long run. And on the civil nuclear credit side, this is something that I know the nuclear industry had asked for years. And while we're seeing some pretty high, prices for power right now, it creates a really important backstop, so that the nuclear industry has that surety moving forward, that they can invest in relicensing, which is also not cheap on the nuclear side, and making sure that they will be able to continue to operate into the future. So, doing everything that we possibly can to maintain these assets, while of course encouraging new deployment. But that's where the Office of Nuclear Energy and all the great work they're doing on like small modular, and of course our EERE and the Hydro Office, Water Technology Office, is doing a lot on figuring out how we get more pump storage. So they're doing incredible work on continued deployment, while we are, making sure that we're holding up the fences here.
I knew we couldn't get through a nuclear conversation without small modular reactors or SMRs coming up.
No.
So I wasn't going to ask you about it, but I knew it would come up. No, but really appreciate, the administration's recognition of those assets that have been online for a long time and still have a lot of life left in them, right? So how do we maintain those? How do we keep those online and keep them, continuing to provide balancing, authority, as you said, but also, reliable and this resource we can count on. So that's great to hear. So on top of all of these grant opportunities, you also are providing opportunities for external entities to provide comments on various aspects, whether it's transmission needs study, whether it's coordinating transmission permitting. So can you talk a little bit about kind of that piece of it, right? And what that outreach has been like, and how then kind of what you're receiving back from external stakeholders is informing some of the work on the grant side, and how those kind of are all connected up.
Sure, and it goes in both directions. We still do the great presidential permits and export authorizations work that our team is constantly churning out, and there's plenty of work to be done on that side. You mentioned the work under Section 216H of the Federal Power Act, which we've come up with a nice acronym called CITAP.
I think is it CTAP or CITAP? Okay, CITAP.
CITAP. Like it's citing in. We tried to make it work. We're getting there.
Yeah.
But again, that's to try and maximize efficiency across the federal government. So that's taking into account some 2005 authorities that were given to the department that were never fully exercised. So now we can coordinate transmission permits across the federal government. So that means you have a place to go if you aren't getting response from BLM or Fish and Wildlife or, Forest Service. I don't want to throw just our interior friends under the bus. They're great and we love them very much. But trying to figure out where there might be stops along the way and puts everyone on a really standard schedule of 2 years, which is of course much shorter than you often see for federal permits to be obtained. So that puts us in the driver's seat, which we're excited about. And we've heard so much from industry through that rulemaking process where we've got the NOPR out right now. And it helps us determine, sometimes the problem is not necessarily happening at the federal level. Sometimes it's really with states and helping to better understand where we need to invest resources in states and how we can better coordinate with them and their processes. What's amazing about big infrastructure bills is that we're building a lot. It turns out that it's very hard to find like an archaeologist these days, which is not a thing that I thought I'd be saying in 2023.
Right.
But they are in hot demand. And so some of these permitting offices that are doing bridges and roads in addition to transmission and solar are really overworked and stretched thin. So figuring out how can we potentially be helpful in better coordinating with our state friends and frankly even to the local level. With transmission, sometimes you have to get permits from the counties or from individual municipalities, which is a ton of work to be able to do that. So continuing to go down that rabbit hole, thanks to a lot of the great comments that we've received from industry and being responsive. We have the tools in our tool belt, but we're not going to stop there. If there's something else that we can continue to do to make your lives easier and to help build the infrastructure that we need, we're going to try our best to pursue that and make sure that we can bring together all the right parties to have the most important conversations.
Excellent. So talk a little bit about kind of, what you envision and what your ambition and GDO's ambition is maybe over the next kind of 18 months or so. What more can we expect out of your office? What more would you like to see from an external perspective? What more can we be doing as external stakeholders to engage with you all?
So, over the next 18 months, man, sometimes I'm thinking about the next 2 weeks.
Right.
But we're going to have a lot more funding opportunities coming out. We will certainly be seeing another round of GRIP during that period of time. I really hope that folks dig deep and think about good partnerships during that period of time. Some of the things that I enjoyed most were seeing where public entities and private entities were really able to partner with each other and think about thoughtful solutions where everyone's bought in. And seeing more of that and making that the norm for both, grant applications, but in general is an area that we're particularly excited about. I think we saw a lot of variation in community benefits programs and applications, and we hope that we can give a lot more clarity on that moving forward, but recognizing that there is some really good work happening out there, of folks engaging at the community level and thinking creatively where I hope that some best practices will emerge from that, especially on transmission, but honestly, not just transmission, across the board, um, even nuclear, for example. So those are some areas where we certainly like to see a lot of engagement from the external community. But as I continue to tell everyone, we are only as good as the applications that we get. And I would much our hope is to make the concept paper process a lot more straightforward and a lot less lift for everyone. And hopefully we can turn those around faster, which I know is important too. And so trying to lower that bar of entry to make sure that we're allowing everybody equal access is really important to us. And we're learning a ton as we go through this first round with everything. But we hope to continue to engage with anybody who wants to have a conversation with us. Certainly, our doors are very open. My external engagement people will hate me saying that, but our doors are very, very open, and we want to have those conversations with you because we've learned so much about individual situations that we have to accommodate and think about, and starting to see trends and helping to connect the right folks with each other. And we think that that's part of our mission and our job.
I think that's great. Thank you so much for that, particularly around the efficiencies around the concept papers. Certainly, certainly support that.
Oh, I know.
But I know we only have a few minutes left here, so this is maybe more a personal question. But just kind of, you seem somewhat uniquely positioned for this role, right? You've had other roles in government in Massachusetts, and kind of curious, coming from Massachusetts, coming here to the federal government, what has that been like for you? Anything that really surprised you? Anything you can say, hey, I saw this in the States, and kind of you're uniquely positioned to provide that kind of feedback from that state perspective to DOE and your colleagues. So I'm kind of curious what that transition's been like, and if there's been some interesting things you've been able to learn from them, but also that you've been able to share with them.
Well, outside of poaching a lot of the best talent at state energy offices and utility commissions, which I will take full responsibility for and be yelled at constantly, I think learning from the states, understanding how legislatures work is important for all of this, because some legislatures only meet every other year. They're not able to provide additional matching funding except through legislation, and that gets really complicated for everybody involved, and that affects our timelines. And something that I keep pushing all of my colleagues on, of like, no, they kind of need to know when this is coming out. Everybody needs to know in order to pass this bill on time to get with the budget. And having the resources of the federal government at your hands is just phenomenal, as compared to being at the state level. But you realize how much it matters to individual people, right? During COVID, I spent a lot of time helping folks who were trying to refinance their homes or figuring out how to keep themselves from being homeless and, again, pay their bills. And every time the lights went out, I would get a phone call at 3 a.m. being like, when are the lights coming back on? As though I were in charge of that. I still sometimes do that. But being that close to the people who are affected helps me be better at this job every day, for sure.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for this. Any closing thoughts, any closing remarks, anything you'd want this audience in particular to hear about GDO and the work you all are doing?
Our doors are open. Please come visit us. Please come talk to us. We're excited about the work that we're doing. We started with 7 people. We're well over 100 people now, a year into this. So we're running on all cylinders and just excited to engage with everyone.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for all that you and your team are doing. I know we really appreciate it. We appreciate the openness and the open door policy that you all have had, and the engagement has really been wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily.